This is TWiT.
Biden announced that he would be putting forth an executive order that is all about our personal information. Joining us to kind of help us understand what this executive order is about and what the impact might be is Carissa Bell from Engadget. Welcome back to the show, Carissa.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Great to have you. So let's get right into it. I was hoping, first and foremost, can you just tell us about President Biden's executive order, which countries are impacted, and what types of information, I guess you'll reveal this too, are barred from sale? Kind of what does that mean?
Yeah, so it restricts the bulk sale of personal data to Russia, China, North Korea, Cuba, Iran, and Venezuela. And it specifically targets data that, a lot of us would think of as pretty sensitive: geolocation, biometric, genomic, health, financial, and, some other types of personally identifying information.
Okay, so this, it's just completely a ban on sharing all of that kind of very personal information with a specific list of countries, or disallowing for the sale of that information to a specific list of other countries. Now, the announcement, the actual press release from the White House said that Biden will issue an executive order. And this was as of February 28th. Today, very rare day, February 29th, given that it's a leap year. Do we know when that order is set to go into effect? Has it been put into effect now? How does that work?
So I don't think we quite know just yet when these new rules will take effect. There's going to be a kind of complex rulemaking process within the Department of Justice to try and figure out, exactly how these rules will work. If there's carve-outs, kind of what those should look like. They're going to engage, I think some of the industry in that process. So we don't know exactly when this will take effect, but this is sort of like them saying that this is, their intention is to make this happen. And, there's after, they kind of go through some rounds of comment and rulemaking, then we'll sort of see like the finalized version of this.
Understood. Now, it makes sense that Biden's personal information, right? That Biden's genomic information and even something as simple as the emails that Biden is sending are a national security risk. You don't want China, Russia, Cuba, all these other places necessarily having access to that. For our listeners who might be going, how does my data make a difference when it comes to national security? Can you talk about what that means and why we would maybe want to block the sale of all Americans' personal data?
Yeah, I think you have to put this kind of in the broader geopolitical context of our relationship with these countries right now, especially, China and Russia. We already know that they kind of access this, the government, talked about yesterday about how we already know that they access a lot of this type of data, either through data broker transactions or, through hacking or kind of other means. And, I think the concern is sort of not necessarily what they can do with any one person's information, but, when you buy these kind of large troves of data, you can, find information about military personnel, activists, dissidents, researchers, people that, the governments of these countries might, have reason to target for like blackmail or espionage or, kind of other things that would be at odds with our, I guess, national security priorities.
Understood. And in your piece, you mentioned a Duke University study. I was hoping you could tell our listeners about that. It was really interesting.
Yeah, so, this is kind of an issue that a lot of researchers have been trying to raise the alarm about for a while. And there's a group at Duke University that put out something last year where they basically, sought out data brokers that were advertising that they had a lot of information about, veterans or military personnel and their families, which, turned out was not that hard for them to find. And then they kind of posed as buyers to see, like, is there any kind of vetting process? Just how difficult is it to get this kind of, pretty sensitive non-public data? And what they found was it was actually really easy and really cheap. They posed as two different firms. One was like an American firm, and one was as a foreign firm. And in both cases, a lot of these companies just kind of handed it over without asking any questions.
Wow. Yeah, that's big. I mean, that clearly suggests that it's quite easy for these countries to get this information. And as you pointed out, these were perhaps citizens who are a little bit more closely tied to national security than others might be. Now, you mentioned a little bit at the top the enforcement process. I hope you could kind of go into it a little bit more. When the president puts forth an executive order, and in this case, the executive order barring this sale, what group is responsible for making sure that data brokers follow these rules? And do we have any information about what that will look like? Maybe even if we're just looking at precedent, that, when something involving tech in the past has been put through with an executive order, how does this process kind of typically follow through?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think that's kind of one of the biggest question marks around, sort of how effective this will ultimately end up being, is sort of how this enforcement process works. I don't think we have the exact details. That's part of what the Department of Justice is kind of working on right now. They've said that broadly, they kind of want to model this after the way that the U.S. does sanctions policies. So the same way that businesses are kind of, expected to have some basic measures in place to make sure that they're not doing business with, entities that are under U.S. sanctions, that they want data brokers and other companies that kind of engage in these transactions to have a process in place where they're doing some kind of vetting, that they have some kind of internal system to at least try and prevent, sometimes the indirect sale of this data. Because, one thing that happens is, one group buys a bunch of data, then they resell it, and then, on down the line, and it makes its way to a country. So they want to try and come up with kind of measures to put the onus on the companies that are holding this data to actually, do a little bit of due diligence. We don't know exactly how that's going to work. I think it's kind of more to come as they kind of go through this process.
Now, one thing that I noticed about this is, as you pointed out, the announcement was made yesterday, and we don't know quite when it's going to go into effect, partly because of what you just explained, that it is a multi-step process. What groups are going to be involved, what exactly it looks like, what carve-outs there are going to be. But for anyone who, for whatever reason, has put in their email to get all of the press releases from the White House, and then anyone who watches this show, or maybe some folks, I'm sure, especially the folks who watch our other show, Security Now, may already be aware of the fact that our data is sold. Maybe they read about that Duke University study. This is now an awareness, or maybe has been for some time, that people have, that their personal information may very well be being purchased by other countries, and in some cases, countries that, politically speaking, we're not on the best terms with. And so there is a level of kind of, I don't know, I guess what I'm getting at is, there's a part of me that's a little bit surprised maybe that this announcement was made, because it draws attention to the fact that this is happening, but yet now there's going to be this period of time while we wait for these protections to come into place. So what's an individual to do, knowing now that our information is being sold to other countries, or that is available for purchase in other countries? Is there something that we should be doing as individuals to help keep ourselves more safe and more private online?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think there was some language in the press release that I think kind of suggests that they also want to draw attention to this issue more broadly. The unfortunate reality is that the data broker industry is, it's a massive multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's largely unregulated. There's some state level laws, but we don't have, comprehensive privacy laws in this country yet. There's been some attempts to do so. So, up until now, there's been relatively few ways, that there's been relatively few restrictions, on these data brokers and, what they can actually do with our data. In terms of what we can do as individuals, I think, there's kind of what we might think of as like sort of privacy and security best practices. Don't give apps and services like permissions that they don't need. Be careful about where you're sharing your personal information. Things like that. I think, it's hard because a lot of this information is already out there. And a lot of it, we do have no control over, for example, credit card companies selling transaction histories to data brokers. So, I think you can educate yourself about how this happens and try and look out for companies that, sort of have a better record on these issues. There's also services that will kind of go through and crawl data broker databases for you and take out your information so it's not, publicly viewable anymore. So there's steps like that. But I think, one of the issues that, this executive order highlights is that there's just so much already out there, and that without kind of our, government getting involved and actually putting some rules in place, a lot of this is going to keep going unchecked.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that is honestly where I celebrate that this is taking place, because this is, those of us who are paying attention, I've been paying attention for some time and are specifically working in this field, have known about data brokers and know the level of information that they collect and keep. And that, yes, there was no way that little changes were ultimately going to make the difference necessary here, that this needed to come kind of from the top. So it's good that this is taking place overall when it comes to protecting our individual privacy. And, in a way, I will say it's a little bit of a shame that it kind of takes it being a national security risk for that to be the case. But all told, it is a change that is positive for the individual consumer. Carissa Bell, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to explain the executive order to us and for joining us today. Of course, folks can head over to Engadget.com to check out your work. Is there anywhere else they should go to follow along with what you're doing?
I'm on social media. I'm on Threads, Blue Sky, still on Twitter. Same handle everywhere, Carissa BE.
Thanks so much for watching this little chunk of Tech News Weekly. If you'd like to get the full episode, well, head over to twit.tv/TNW. There you'll find buttons you can click or tap to subscribe to the entire show in audio and video formats. Or just look in the description. We've got links down there as well.